I remember when I first started planning my wedding, the excitement, the dreams. I really thought it was going to be the happiest day of my life. I could almost see it, a beautiful day filled with flowers, laughter, and love. I wanted it to be perfect, so I started early. I found a venue that was just right, affordable yet charming, a rooftop garden with fairy lights. It felt magical. I was careful with every detail, from the menu with vegetarian options for my sister to making sure there was champagne for my mom. I even chose a location closer to home so my family wouldn't have to travel too far. When they said they couldn't afford to come, I didn't hesitate. I believed them. Of course I did. So I offered to help. I ended up covering everything, the flights, the hotel rooms, the outfits. I even paid for my sister's husband just so she wouldn't have to travel alone. I kept telling myself that it was all worth it, that family would be there when it truly mattered. I didn't realize then that showing up meant something entirely different to them than it did to me. The morning of the wedding, I woke up early, full of nervous excitement. My best friend, who'd been with me through thick and thin, messaged me to say he and his partner had landed safely. They had paid for everything themselves, no fuss, just happy to be there for me. Meanwhile, I kept checking the airline app for my parents' flight. It landed on time, which was a relief. I thought they were on their way. As I stood in the dressing room, I kept peeking out the window, hoping to see them arrive, feeling like a nervous teenager waiting for a date. The officiant came by around 3 with a warm smile, just checking if we were ready. I asked for a few more minutes, thinking maybe they hit traffic or their phones were dead. I called them straight to voicemail, called again, no response. The makeup artist finished my hair, and the photographer took soft photos of my bouquet resting by the window. I tried to smile for the camera, but I couldn't stop checking my phone. Still nothing. By 3:30, my best friend gently knocked on the door, asking if I wanted to start. I looked at him, my throat tight with emotion. My dad was supposed to walk me down the aisle. He had promised. I asked for just 5 more minutes, forcing a smile that felt like it was going to crack my face. He nodded and waited with me, pretending not to notice my shaking hands. I tried calling again. Voicemail. Then finally, at 3:37, my phone rang. It was my mom's number. I answered so quickly I nearly dropped the phone. Her voice was so casual, so unconcerned. "Oh, hi, sweetie," she said. "Sorry, we couldn't make it." I blinked, trying to understand. What happened?" I asked, my voice shaking. She laughed like I was being unreasonable. "Your sister's brother-in-law had a poetry reading," she explained. "It was important to him, and she didn't want to go alone. We had to support her. You know how family is." I couldn't say anything. She filled the silence, her voice bright and cheerful. "You understand, right?" In the background, I heard my dad's voice, amused, saying, "Maybe next time." I stood there in my wedding dress, makeup done, bouquet in hand, trying to process that my parents had chosen a poetry reading over my wedding. Not even my sister's poetry reading, but her husband's brother's. And they hadn't even bothered to inform me. They let me wait, let me worry, let me think they were lost or hurt or on their way, right up until the moment the music should have started. They let me pay for everything, let me rearrange the entire wedding just to make it easier for them. Yet, it still wasn't important enough. By 3:45, I put my phone away and took a deep breath. My best friend was still there, standing quietly, ready to support me. I asked him, with a voice that cracked under the weight of it all, if he would walk me down the aisle. He smiled without hesitation and said, "Of course." And so I went, arm in arm with the boy who built tree forts with me in the backyard, who once helped sew a Barbie dress when my sister laughed too hard to help. The ceremony continued. Vows were exchanged, rings slipped onto fingers, and people clapped. I sat there in that dimly lit room, and it felt surreal. The day had been a whirlwind of emotions, and yet it was as if I was merely an observer in my own life. Everyone was there, celebrating, laughing, and I just smiled. It was the kind of smile that starts to hurt after a while, the kind that feels like a mask you can't take off. At the reception, I played the part. I laughed at the jokes, cut the cake, and danced with my husband. The string lights above us were beautiful, a testament to the hours I spent hanging them, but inside, I felt something heavy and unyielding settle in my chest. When the night finally wound down and we were alone, I found myself at the desk in our hotel room. My laptop was a beacon in the dimness, and I could feel my husband watching me from across the room. He asked if I was sure, and I didn't hesitate. My fingers moved with a sense of purpose over the keyboard. He reminded me, with a gentle voice, that there was no going back once I hit send. I looked at him then, really looked at him, and for the first time that day, my smile felt real. Tomorrow, everything would change. I pressed send, and it felt like a release. They say your wedding night should be about looking forward, not back, but as I lay beside my husband, wrapped in the warmth of the blankets, my mind drifted to my sister and the years that led me here. My sister was always the one who stood out. 3 years older, yet it felt like she was in a completely different world. In high school, she was the girl everyone noticed. She had this effortless charm, the kind that made people feel special just by being near her. But she wasn't kind, not to those who didn't fit her mold. I remember watching from the sidelines, seeing the way she'd smirk or whisper, and sometimes it was blatant, like a loud fake cough aimed at someone in thrift store shoes. Other times it was subtle, so ingrained in her behavior that you'd almost miss it, but I didn't miss it. I felt it keenly, especially when her laughter was directed at me. Our parents had their own way of justifying her behavior. They called it selective, said she had standards. I remember coming home in tears once, feeling excluded, and my mom told me I needed to toughen up. My dad said not everyone is made to be popular, as if it was my fault for not shining as brightly as my sister. I was different. I had a few close friends, and that was enough for me. My best friend lived next door, and we spent countless afternoons lost in our own little world, building Lego cities and creating stories about superheroes who baked cookies instead of saving the world. When he won a doll at a carnival, we named it Captain Sprinkles, and it seemed like the funniest thing ever. But my parents didn't see it that way. I overheard my dad once insinuating things about boys who liked dolls. My mom smirked during dinner, and their laughter felt dismissive, like they were commenting on the weather. They were never angry, just disappointed, like I was letting them down by choosing my own path, by not following in my sister's footsteps. Over time, it felt like they stopped expecting much from me and shifted all their hopes onto her. She was their trophy, the homecoming queen, the one destined for greatness. Her successes were celebrated, and her missteps excused as part of growing up. Even when her actions hurt others, like when she bullied a girl so badly she switched schools, my parents brushed it off as typical teenage drama. Girls are mean sometimes, they said. But when I received an academic scholarship to a local college, their reaction was muted, almost indifferent. There was no celebration, no pride, just a vague smile from my mom, as if being the quiet one explained everything. It took me a while to understand that in our family, love was conditional. It was loud and clear for her, but silent and distant for me. Growing up, I internalized this disparity. It shaped the way I saw myself and my place in the world. My sister's achievements were like a spotlight that left me in the shadows. I learned to find solace in solitude, in the corners where I wasn't compared to her. My love for books, for quiet moments, became my refuge. I poured myself into my studies, finding validation in academic success because it was one of the few things I could control. Meanwhile, my sister's life seemed to unfold like a series of triumphs. She moved through school with ease, her popularity never waning. She was the one everyone wanted to be around, the one who seemed to have it all figured out. And I was just there, watching from the sidelines, feeling both admiration and resentment. It was a complicated mix of emotions, this push and pull between envy and a desire for something different. I didn't want her life exactly, but I longed for the recognition and acceptance that she received so effortlessly. In college, I found a new sense of freedom. Away from the constant comparisons, I was able to carve out my own identity. It was liberating to be seen for who I was, not as an extension of my sister. I made friends who appreciated me for my quirks and my passions. They didn't care about my sister's accomplishments or the shadow they cast. For the first time, I felt like I belonged somewhere, like I was enough just as I was. But even as I thrived in this new environment, the past lingered. Family gatherings were still fraught with tension, with unspoken judgments and the ever-present reminder of my place in the family hierarchy. My parents' expectations for my sister never wavered, and their indifference toward my achievements remained. It was a constant reminder that no matter how far I went, some things would never change. I learned to navigate these dynamics, to protect myself from the hurt, but it was always there, just beneath the surface. When I met my husband, everything shifted. He saw me in a way no one else ever had, and for the first time I felt truly seen. Our relationship was a refuge from the chaos, a safe space where I could be myself without fear of judgment. He understood the complexities of my family, the weight I carried, and he supported me in ways I hadn't known were possible. His love was steady and unwavering, a stark contrast to the conditional affection I grew up with. As our relationship deepened, I began to see a future that was separate from my past, a future where I could define my own happiness. And yet, when the time came to plan our wedding, those old insecurities resurfaced. I wanted it to be a day that reflected who I had become, not who I was expected to be. There were moments of doubt, of wondering if I could truly break free from the patterns that had defined my life for so long. But with his support, I found the courage to move forward, to embrace the life we were building together. When I reflect on my early years, it's almost like watching a film where I'm just a background character. Growing up, my sister and I were like night and day. She was the star, always in the spotlight, and I was just there. Our parents adored her because she was always performing, always the center of attention. I realized early on that I couldn't compete with her charisma. Whenever we were together, people naturally gravitated towards her. It was as if I was invisible unless I was doing something impressive, but even then, their attention wouldn't last. As we grew older, the differences between us became more pronounced. Life seemed to be a series of opportunities handed to her on a silver platter. She floated through life effortlessly while I worked tirelessly, often taking night shifts and running a small online store just to make ends meet. My contribution to the household was significant, but my parents seemed to forget that I was paying half the mortgage while they insisted I was lucky to still live at home. Then, one summer, everything changed. I met the man who would become my husband. He was older, wise beyond his years, and for the first time I felt truly seen. He cared about my work, my thoughts, and my feelings, not just in passing, but genuinely. It was refreshing and unexpected, and I fell for him quickly. When he first met my sister, I noticed her interest immediately. She had that way about her, a flicker in her eye, a certain posture. She turned on the charm, leaning in a little too closely, laughing a bit too loudly, and it made my stomach churn. Later, she tried to engineer encounters with him without me being there, and even sent him messages. They weren't scandalous, just friendly, but I knew her intentions. Thankfully, he brushed them off politely, and I thought that was the end of it. But it wasn't. Weeks later, she played the victim card with our parents, claiming some sort of unjust treatment. She cried, saying she saw him first, twisting reality to fit her narrative. Her words were powerful, and somehow I was painted as the villain despite her own relationship with someone else. In our family, emotions often outweighed facts. My parents, predictably, took her side, advising me to consider her feelings, emphasizing that family should come before some boy. No one asked about my feelings. It was as if they didn't exist. She eventually married someone else, someone wealthy and reliable, but behind closed doors she was never satisfied. She would make snide remarks about him, calling him boring but rich, making jokes at his expense. It was painful to hear, knowing the truth about her affairs and seeing my parents turn a blind eye to it all. For years, I had been the quiet one, cleaning up her messes and stepping aside, but this time, I couldn't let it continue. Someone had to know the truth. Someone had to stand up. Maybe it wasn't about revenge. Maybe it was about finally standing up for myself. I made a decision. I closed my laptop, feeling a weight lift off my shoulders. Tomorrow would be different, and I wouldn't apologize for it. The next morning, my phone buzzed incessantly. I had missed calls from my parents and an unknown number. I didn't answer. Instead, I buried myself under the blankets, letting the hum of the hotel air conditioner drown out my thoughts. If it was important, they'd text. And they did. The messages were urgent, demanding I call and fix whatever they believed I had broken. But I was done being the one who fixed things. I set the phone down, refusing to engage. My husband, noticing my stress, asked if everything was okay. I shrugged it off, telling him my family was in crisis as usual. He laughed, pulling the covers over his head, and I felt a sense of peace wash over me. Later that morning, a text from my cousin filled in the gaps. Her social awareness was minimal, but she had heard that my sister's husband had left. My family was, predictably, in chaos. For once, I wasn't caught in the middle. I was on the outside, and it felt liberating. The pieces came together slowly, like trying to assemble a jigsaw puzzle when you're missing half the pieces. After the poetry reading, my sister's husband discovered the message I had sent. It wasn't just a message, really. More like a collection of screenshots, recordings, and undeniable proof. Proof that his wife, whom he had stood by through various job changes, broken leases, and unfulfilled dreams, had never truly respected him. She had laughed at him behind his back, cheated on him. From what I gathered, there wasn't an immediate explosion of anger. Instead, there was silence. A long, dangerous silence. The kind of silence that suggests the real damage is lurking beneath the surface, not yet visible. In a matter of days, the consequences began to unfold. My sister's husband quietly moved out, avoiding any dramatic confrontations, and filed for divorce by the end of that week. His departure meant more than just the end of a marriage. It was the loss of an invisible safety net that my parents had never openly acknowledged they relied on. He stopped his financial support, ceased covering the shortfalls in their mortgage, and no longer made excuses for their unpaid bills. It was like someone turned off a tap we didn't even realize we were drinking from. I made my own quiet adjustments. I canceled the automatic payments I had been making for 2 years, which covered part of their utilities, emergency dental work, and the car lease I had co-signed. I unlinked my accounts, removed my name from the shared emergency fund, and redirected my savings to a place where I wouldn't feel guilty using them. I didn't make any announcements, didn't seek confrontation. I simply did a quiet vanishing act. Financial ruin doesn't happen all at once. It seeps in. First, the credit card minimums get missed, then business invoices are paid late, suppliers start calling instead of emailing, polite reminders, and eventually, the bank informs you that your application for a second line of credit has been declined. It's a slow, painful process, much like the way they had treated me over the years. Small neglects, small insults, small betrayals, until the foundation was completely rotten. I spent many evenings in silence, grappling with the unfamiliar ache of freeing myself from something I'd spent my entire life chasing. I always thought that letting go of my parents would feel like falling off a cliff, but it didn't. It felt like removing a weight from my ankle. I wasn't falling, I was floating. But that didn't mean it didn't hurt. There were quiet moments when the grief hit unexpectedly hard. Like when I started drafting thank you notes to wedding guests, and instinctively thought to send one to my parents before remembering they hadn't been there. Or when I wandered through a store, saw a mother of the bride frame, and my hand reached out automatically, foolishly, as if believing the right people had cared. Or when a stranger smiled at us and said, "You must have such supportive families." I had to laugh because the only thing my family supported was their own egos. There's a certain kind of humor that seeps into your bones when you survive people like that. Not the kind that makes you laugh out loud, but the dry, tired, Of course they did. Kind. The kind you savor like bad coffee in a cheap diner at 2 a.m., just grateful to be anywhere else. There were other changes, quieter ones. About 2 weeks after the wedding, I found out I was pregnant. I stared at the test in the cramped hotel bathroom, my back pressed against the wall, my heartbeat echoing in my ears. It wasn't planned, yet not entirely unplanned, just earlier than expected. I sat there for a long time, my palms pressed against the cold tile as the world seemed to tilt slightly around me. When I told my husband, he smiled, pulled me in, and said, "We're ready." "You're ready." For the first time in a long while, I believed him. I didn't tell my parents, not even when the texts and emails started trickling in. Some news just isn't meant for everyone. I learned that the hard way. There are moments in life that are too precious to be shared with those who might twist them into something else, use them as leverage in their own narratives. My parents' situation was deteriorating, and I was aware, even though I tried not to actively seek out updates. Gossip has a way of finding you, especially when it involves family. Cousins talked, and old neighbors sent messages filled with curiosity rather than genuine concern. Our family group chat, which I had muted a long time ago, buzzed with worry passed down like a game of telephone. Business wasn't booming for them anymore. Revenue took a hit, and a few vendors decided they didn't want to be part of whatever was happening. Bills started to stack up, and they began missing payments, starting small and then growing larger. It wasn't a dramatic collapse. Not yet. There were no foreclosure notices or court dates, but the pressure was unmistakable, like a crack slowly spreading through glass. They hadn't come knocking on my door yet. That moment was still to come, when desperation would finally overpower pride. I wondered sometimes if they were taken aback, surprised that the quiet one, the daughter who faded into the background, was the one they had leaned on the most without ever acknowledging it. Nights alone at the kitchen table became my time to reflect. I would sit there, surrounded by paperwork for our new house, while my husband looked through listings, our feet intertwined beneath the table. Those moments were peaceful in contrast to the chaos I knew was brewing elsewhere. Occasionally, my childhood best friend would call, and we'd reminisce about growing up in the old neighborhood, laughing about the time we accidentally flooded his garage with our makeshift water slide. We'd make half-serious plans to travel once our baby arrived. He never asked about my parents, and he didn't need to. True family understands that silence can sometimes mean survival. By the time 3 months had passed since our wedding, it was evident that my parents' grasp on their situation was slipping. Their business announced a temporary closure for renovations that never seemed to end. Their home quietly went up for preliminary offers, masked as a downsizing move for retirement. People started to notice. The invitations stopped coming, and instead there were pitying glances. There were no explosive arguments or dramatic confrontations, just a slow, steady unraveling, much like the way my trust in them had unraveled over the years. Meanwhile, I felt like I was drifting further away, not falling, but flying. The day they arrived, it was raining, not the gentle, romantic kind, but a harsh downpour that slapped against the windows and made you consider building an ark. It was fitting, really. I had just finished folding tiny onesies in mint green, soft gray, and the little yellow stars when the doorbell rang. Not once but 5 times in quick succession, as if someone was pressing the button with their whole hand. My husband froze at the sound, and we exchanged a knowing look across the kitchen. We already knew. I glanced through the peephole, and there they were, suitcases at their feet, jackets soaked, smiles tight with fury. My parents and my sister, 3 faces I hadn't seen in months, now crowding the doorway like a storm. I didn't open the door right away. Instead, I pressed my forehead against the cool wood, taking deep breaths. My husband came up behind me, placing a reassuring hand on my back. "We can call now," he said softly. "Not yet," I whispered back. Some things needed to be witnessed firsthand before being set ablaze. When I finally opened the door, they pushed past me without a greeting. Rainwater dripped onto our hardwood floor, and my sister let her duffel bag fall in the middle of the living room. My dad stood by the TV as if he owned it, while my mom gave a nod that seemed to demand tea service. "We're not leaving," my dad stated, his voice firm. "Not until you fix this," my mom added. I closed the door behind them slowly, my heartbeat strangely calm despite the situation. They wasted no time launching into their demands. They wanted me to call my sister's husband, to insist that I had lied, to convince him that it was all born out of jealousy, a misunderstanding, a cruel prank. My mom accused me of ruining their lives. My dad said I embarrassed the family, and my sister insisted that I fix it, regardless of the cost. Their voices rose and tangled with each other, a mix of anger, fear, and desperation. I stood there, letting it all wash over me. I remember that day like it was yesterday. My parents showed up at my doorstep, unannounced, as if they had every right to invade my space. To them, I was nothing more than a convenience, a means to an end. I could see it in their eyes. I was just another task to be handled, a malfunctioning machine they were determined to fix by force. My dad made it clear when he crossed his arms and declared that they weren't leaving until I complied with their demands. My mom began talking about rearranging the rooms, settling in as though they had already decided for me. My sister, dragging her suitcase, made her way to the guest room, acting like it was already her own. It might have been funny if it wasn't so absurd. They seriously thought I was still the same girl who would let them walk all over me and take control of my life. But they hadn't been paying attention. I told them they were trespassing. They stared at me, confused, as if I was speaking a foreign language. My mom protested, reminding me that I had invited them, but I hadn't even told them where I lived. Behind me, my husband was already on the phone, using that calm, methodical voice he reserved for important matters. My dad stepped forward, trying to intimidate me, insisting that you don't call the police on family. I couldn't help but respond with a thin smile, reminding him that family doesn't abandon you on your wedding day. That shut them up, if only for a moment. For the first time, I saw genuine fear flicker across my mom's face. It didn't take long after that. 15 minutes later, there was a knock at the door. 2 officers stood there, professional and polite. I didn't need to say much. I just pointed, showed them my ID and the lease with just my name and my husband's. The officers asked my parents and sister to leave, giving them a chance to pack up calmly. My sister, of course, threw a tantrum, accusing me of being heartless, of destroying what little family I had left. My mom cried, while my dad muttered threats under his breath, but under the watchful eyes of those patient officers, they eventually left, dragging their wet bags back into the rain. When the door finally closed behind them, I sank onto the couch, feeling utterly drained. My husband sat beside me, offering silent warmth. I felt the baby kick softly, a gentle reminder that this was my family now, not them. Later, we moved away, found a place further from the chaos, closer to the life we wanted. We didn't announce our new address. Only a select few knew where we were. My best friend and his partner visited sometimes, bringing laughter and stories of adventures we hadn't yet experienced. The life I had once imagined with my parents, filled with ease and unconditional support, I built it elsewhere, and I built it better. Through distant family and mutual acquaintances, I heard bits and pieces of what happened afterwards. The house my parents loved to boast about was sold at a loss. Their business folded. My sister, who always seemed immune to consequences, was now couch surfing, blaming everyone but herself. I didn't reach out, not when the divorce papers were signed, not when the bankruptcy was declared, not when their social media presence disappeared like spilled wine soaking into dusty floors. I used to think cutting them off would feel like losing a part of myself, like losing a limb. But it didn't. It felt like standing up for the first time, realizing I had never been broken. I had just been sitting in the wrong place all along. I still have the tiny mint green onesie tucked away in a drawer. It was the first I bought, the one I had been afraid to tell anyone about. the one that made me realize I didn't need their approval. My baby will never grow up thinking love is something you have to earn by being useful. She'll never feel small in her own home. She'll know what family truly means. And the best part? They'll never even know her name. Sometimes I wonder if I went too far, if cutting them off, calling the police, sending that message was all necessary. But then I think about the girl I once was, the one who kept forgiving, kept hoping, and I realize I didn't go too far. They just never thought I'd go anywhere at all. Still, I often wonder what others think. Did I do the right thing? I'd love to hear your thoughts. If you relate to this or want to hear more stories, don't forget to let me know.